Hello, my name is Donna Cox. I am a parenting consultant and a counselor. Under the best of circumstances, co-parenting is a delicate balancing act between good communication and positive mutual respect for the other parties involved, all towards the development of the child. The child is at the center of whatever they do. However, there are situations and times when this delicate balance is not honored by one or even both of the parents involved. And what happens is the focus comes off of the child and onto the individual winning a perceived competition, or maybe even a real competition, between the co-parents. This does not bode well for the child at all. It creates parental alienation, where one parent or both parents vie for the affections of the child to the detriment of not only the other parent's relationship with the child, but also to the detriment of the child's proper development. Narcissism and parental alienation have a very interesting relationship. We're going to explore this in Family Fest this year.
Reverend Dr. Gordon A.R. Edwards. Narcissism and parental alienation, I believe, go hand in hand. It's almost difficult, impossible even, to picture a narcissist as a parent, because narcissism in and of itself posits that a narcissist does not understand what it means to love or to show empathy, to show care, to mirror and pay attention to what's going on in the child. So you can understand how difficult it would be for a narcissist to be a parent. But here is the thing though. Narcissism cuts across and prevents a child from developing normally, because the narcissist is all into self and self-interest rather than the interests of the other. So those, say, the first 3 years of life, 2.5 to 3 years of life, when the child's sense of self and attachment or relationship styles are developing. Imagine a parent being narcissist and then also having to be consistently and sensitively responding to the emotional needs of a child. It's virtually impossible because the narcissist cannot develop a sense of connection with someone else.
My name is Cornelius Bartlett. I'm the chairman and founder of Family Fest Barbados. I'm also a family advocate. When I think of narcissism and parental alienation, I think of the most absolutely devastating phenomenon that I've seen hit the family probably in the last 30 to 40 years. Not only are the victims on the receiving end in a very devastated position. But the children, who are the real innocent victims here, are the ones who will not only suffer as children, but very often will go on to become narcissists themselves and experience many emotional and psychological disorders. So our conversations through these discussions is not just about a talk shop, but about empowering you, the listener, with the knowledge and the information that you need to not only manage for yourself, but to help maybe a family member or a friend manage as well. So we're looking forward to having you join us in listening in or even participating in one of our panel discussions on Facebook and YouTube. Until we see you online, God bless.
We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. With God on our side, we're marching strong, looking out for hurting children all around, and helping the parents carry on. Standing united, we'll overcome. We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at Family Fest Barbados. My name is Dale Ford, and I'm your moderator for this evening's discussion. And our topic is Children as Victims of Narcissistic Parents, the Risks for Those Children. And you would have had a very comprehensive preamble from Cornelius Bartlett in our opening, giving you a background on why we're having this conversation and why it is important, and of course, the objectives to bring under the spotlight an understanding of the dangers and impact of narcissistic parents on the present and future lives of their innocent children and the family as a whole. I'd like to introduce our guest, Carrie Jordan, Reverend Dr. Gordon Edwards, and of course, Cornelius Bartlett. You know, we had advertised that Fabian Sargent would be joining us for this particular conversation, but Fabian is under the weather. He was traveling and he's come back in not feeling 100%. So we wish Fabian all the best, and we do miss him. It's always interesting to talk to Fabian. He always has a good conversation and an interesting perspective on similar issues. So we do, again, wish Fabian the best, and I say good evening to Cornelius Bartlett.
Good evening.
Reverend, good evening, Cornelius. Reverend Dr. Gordon Edwards. Good evening, Dr. Edwards.
Good evening.
And,
Good evening.
And of course, Carrie Jordan. So we're going to go straight into this conversation because we have an hour to discuss to discuss this particular topic. So I'm going to start with Cornelius. Cornelius, you, as they said in your preamble, gave us the background to why we're having this conversation, why this is the theme for Family Fest this year. You've been in some of the conversations before. Just bring those of us who may not have been and those who are joining us for the first time up to date on what has been said and where we are since we started.
Okay, thanks, Dale, and good evening to all of our viewers and listeners. The topic or the theme this year is really narcissism and parental alienation. And I know a lot of people, when they hear the word narcissism, a lot of people think they know what it is, but even if they don't know what it is, they've heard of it. But not much is heard about parental alienation. And one of the reasons why the two are clumped together this year is because what the research shows is that parental alienation, which is a family dynamic where one parent or members of an organization actually brainwashes a child to alienate a parent. So I know that normally it's parental alienation, meaning that the child alienates the parent, but the source of it is usually another parent who has an axe to grind with the parent that's on the outside, but it can also be an organization. And one of the reasons why it is important to understand narcissism is that the research shows, and this is some recent research as in the last year or two, shows that when you trace the occurrence of parental alienation to its roots, very often you find a narcissist on the other end as an alienator, very often, not always, but very often. So we thought it worthwhile and meaningful to have the two looked at, not separately, but together. And tonight's discussion, as you would have mentioned, we would have seen it, you would have seen in our advertising, is dealing with narcissism and children as victims of narcissistic parents. So that is pretty much a background of what has happened over the last couple of weeks. We've looked at the men's week, we've looked at the issue and during the women's week, and now we're into children's week.
All right, Dr. Edwards, how do these challenges that Cornelius spoke about, how do these present in children? What are the signs that experts look for to determine that a child has in fact been affected or, as strongly as Cornelius said, brainwashed into this kind of behavior?
Thank you. For sure, when you have a child who might have been relating to the alienated parent in a wholesome, loving, caring, supportive way, and then all of a sudden that seemed to shift, then one needs to begin to examine why is it that this child has now turned against that parent. So that child could be denigrating to the parent, sometimes cursing the parent, calling the parent by different names, and not good names, but names that are derogatory, sometimes the names that child might overhear from the parent or might have intentionally shared with the child. But you also have situations where the child is split, not wanting to give the sometimes custodial parent the impression that they love the other parent. And so they're split. They can't see, for instance, then that you can have both good and bad in both parents. So there's a kind of ambivalence that is lacking. It's either or that would show up. Then there are also times that the child might be very well creating certain kinds of situations to avoid having contact with the parent. And this appears to be without any grounding, any real basis. So I don't want to go with that. So why is that? Oh, that is whatever. And there's no real basis for that other than what they might have heard from the other parent. You also bear in mind that the child himself might manifest depression, might be anxious, in life generally might experience self-esteem issues. And so all of these come together to undermine the integrity of the child, but also undermine the integrity of the alienated parent. So these are some of the things that you'd look for when you're looking at narcissism on the one hand, but also the alienation that stems from it.
Is it more specific to one parent over the other? I mean, gender specifically. Are women more guilty of this? Are men more guilty of it? Is it equal across the board?
Well, the funny thing about it is that because the way society is constructed, that it's usually father against mother, mother against father. And whereas the father might be trying to build out a relationship with the child or wanting to do that, or might even be the safest parent, generally the courts might side with locating the child with the mother. So what you'll find is most of the times, parental alienation begins within that context. And sometimes it's because that parent might feel that, you know, they might have been cheated out of something, and so they target that parent. And invariably, especially if the male moves on, the father moves on to another relationship, that becomes an issue. So there is some jealousy, some envy as well that informs that dynamic, you know. But the way it shows up because mothers tend to be the ones who have custody of the children most times. It tends to be the mother who creates the alienation or the ground for alienation.
Well, Carrie, how do experts navigate these kinds of well, the research is being done, so these waters are not necessarily as uncharted as before. But what are some of these specific things? I know Dr. Edwards spoke about some of the signals, some of the signs, sorry. But what are some of these specific things that experts have to kind of zoom in on to say, okay, definitively, this is what is happening to a child?
First of all, good night, everybody. My take on the subject matter tonight is that you first have to bring into context what narcissists are. And pretty much by the diagnosis statistical manual is a mental disorder in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance, a need for deep admiration, a lack of empathy for others, and however, behind the mask of ultra confidence and stuff, they have a low self-esteem to some extent. When you look at parental narcissism, first of all, you got to determine how outside of a clinical diagnosis can you determine a parent is a narcissist, because there must be a diagnosis to it. So if you just, they might have narcissistic tendencies, but they might not be a narcissist by definition in terms of diagnosis by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. The question earlier was the impact on children and stuff. Experts usually come to get a better understanding that there might be some issues with a child of a parent who, I don't want tend to dive into the word narcissist because narcissists don't only affect children per se. But child in that arena more than likely will be a child who is within themselves, and then when they go into the presence of others, they're overachieving, trying to overachieve, and when they don't understand failure because they're always busy trying to impress. But some of the more negative and traumatic traits is that you develop a child with trauma or stress, trauma or depression. You develop a child with the trauma of feeling that they're not enough, because a lot of children don't meet that standard of a narcissist because you probably never will. You also got to look at, if you put it in Barbados context and looking at a good example of, I don't want to use narcissists, but I use parents using their children to live their life vicariously through the child. You look at the common interest exam is a very good example of how the expectations of a parent, because I don't want nobody to see that my child might be a little slow or behind in educational thing. I'm going to push and push and push. so that when my child goes Harrison College or Queens, my child passed for Harrison College. And the whole thing was not about what the child wanted or what was best for the child, is what makes that individual parent look good in the eyes of other parents. And in those kind of atmospheres, you usually create some trauma for the child that usually end up in depression. They usually start to lash out at school when they go into the new secondary school. As they get older, they decide, I'm not doing any more work. I did that for her, but I'm finished with this. She got a child that can start to give a lot of problems at the school and everything. And we do what I usually call a deep dive or autopsy into the situation. You get a better understanding that it was pressure from another end, and the child never really lived the child's life or developed at its own interest. It was pretty much doing the things that the parent was expecting of them through what the parent wanted the other persons around them to see about their child, because it makes them, the narcissist, look a certain way. It's all about them.
All right, Carrie, I want to emphasize because, keyboard bandits are going to be saying that Kerry Jordan get on Family Fest and say because they wanted the best for my child, that I'm a narcissist. That's not what Kerry is saying.
That's not what I said. I'll be very clear that narcissists, and let me repeat again, narcissists are usually diagnosed by a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I'm saying narcissistic tendencies for persons who are professional enough to recognize them. I'm professional enough to recognize them in my field, but I cannot diagnose. So I can say, well, I'm seeing the tendencies, but I can't say for certain that that's what the person has. So I'm saying that I use the term parents trying to live vicariously through their children. If you're looking at a true narcissistic parenting, that's what it actually is, a parent trying to make themselves look good through what they themselves do not have or what they want society to see of them through their children's accomplishments.
I want to go back to Dr. Edwards. Is it usually that a parent who is diagnosed as a narcissist also had a narcissistic parent or caregiver?
Not necessarily, but there's a correlation on some level. We talk about the attachment patterns. A narcissist is usually located within the disorganized attachment pattern, where this person really didn't get the kind of undergirding that an attentive, sensitive, consistently responsive parent would give. Now you can understand that if that person is a narcissist, how easy that is for a child in those first 3 years of life to experience that kind of alienation within themselves. Because a narcissist also experiences the alienation within themselves, alienation from self, that they have a false, inflated sense of self. There's a grandiose view of self. They feel that they're better than or superior to. So a parent who might be coming from that place could very well fracture the child's sense of self and create the ground for developing a sense of narcissism. You see, now what my brother was very much mentioning is the diagnosis that you have you're suffering from narcissistic disorder. But often enough, we might not diagnose them because a lot of these narcissists go undiagnosed. The chances are they will not go to get assessed and evaluated. So they are alone to themselves, basically. But you can see, actually, of the symptoms that are in the DSM, there are 5 that are required. So just 5 of those symptoms to be present, and the person is appropriately diagnosed as suffering from narcissistic disorder. But it's the wounding that takes place in their own life that they transfer across generation to their children. So that's why I said there's a correlation on some level between who the parent is, narcissistic, and what the child can become, especially if the child develops a disorganized attachment pattern. And that is over again secure attachment pattern, ambivalent attachment pattern, and avoidant attachment pattern. And these continue throughout their lives unless there is reparative work that is done. So you have a child that, in a sense, is responding to the parent, and the parent is narcissistic. So then you understand as well that that child lacks the kind of capacity to mirror or to experience the kind of wounding that takes place. So I'm speaking in harsh tones to you, as they might do with a parent, and not having any real feeling about that, because they have now become devoid of that sensitivity. That empathy is lacking. You see, so whereas it's lacking in a narcissist, it's now transferred in based upon the relationship between parent and child. So yeah.
But Cornelius, I want to get to you, because these children who are so affected by parents who may or not have been diagnosed as narcissists, they come into society, they go into the schools. How do we see that presenting itself in everyday life?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to answer it, but I want to go back a little bit and to caution viewers and listeners not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I know we live in a society now where we are very concerned about stigmas, and we are very concerned about name calling. And I am, yes, concerned about stigma and name calling as well. But this issue of narcissism, which is why I like our title, children with narcissistic parents. In other words, parents that are carrying the traits of narcissism. And if you pull out all of the traits of narcissism, they are extremely dangerous. I don't think we should ignore these traits and trying to help children to navigate these traits because of the possible view of stigma or stigmatizing of parents. Now, I want us who are listening now to come out of our bodies, have an out-of-body experience, and become a child. Think of yourself as being a child. So I want to ask for a moment for persons who are listening to become a child, a vulnerable child whose brain is not fully developed yet, a child who is dependent on parents, a child who is attaching to parents in a particular way. In other words, based on the attachment model that is very well documented, children attach to, at the earliest stage in life, to two human beings or human beings with which they are given care to early in life. So there's nobody else that a child is going to trust more than a parent, whether the parent is biological or not. Because if you give your child to a man and a woman, or a woman at new birth, that person becomes the parent. So it doesn't matter if it's biological or not. We're talking about someone who acts as a parent in the life of that child. So let's look at the person who is narcissistic and an innocent, vulnerable child. I call it a blank slate, because that's what a child is, a blank slate. A person who is narcissistic, they are thinking about themselves and themselves only. They are concerned about what people think. They're not concerned about having a real connection with that child. So they talk about living vicariously through the child. It becomes easy for a person who is narcissistic. I'm not using the word narcissist, a person who is narcissistic. What neighbors think and what people in society think, if they're good at athletics, that makes the narcissist look good. If they're very brilliant academically and well organized, and they're very studious, and they can, as Kerry was talking earlier about, and they can do well in 11 plus or do well in exams, period, it makes the narcissistic person looks good. The narcissistic person also is someone who, because they're suffering from fear and shame and anxiety and all of these things, a narcissistic person can go into a rage really easily. Now, picture you're a child and you realize you have a very volatile, very unpredictable, very self-absorbed parent. You learn to cope and survive. And invariably, because a narcissistic person is someone who can lie easily, they paint pictures different from what they really are. They are constantly pressuring you to deliver things to make them feel good about themselves. What you have is a child that learns early how to adapt. A child who learns how to be manipulated, and they themselves learn to manipulate as well. A child who feels uncertain about himself. And one of the things that psychologists have seen is that if you have two parents, one is unpredictable and one is very predictable, one is very stable and one is unstable, guess who the child clings to most? The child clings to the unpredictable parent the most, because the child, it's almost like the child recognizes that mommy or daddy is very predictable, they're safe, and then my mommy or daddy, the other parent, is unsafe. So they actually consolidate their emotions around that person and almost trying to get more from that person who is very unpredictable. And we can see then how that sets up a child to become an alienator. So in a real sense, when I look at the research, I'm not surprised that the narcissistic parent is the one who becomes the alienator against the targeted parent, because that child is actually cultured from very early. And might I say before I pass over that the alienation very often starts before the breakup of the marriage, because you if you marry someone that is narcissistic, you are all in love. You're not even noticing, or you're not going to see them the way they really are. You're going to see them how you want to see them. It is only when the marriage breaks down that you realize that after you move out or you all split, that you see your child go against you, not recognizing that behavior of the parent in causing the child to consolidate towards them, trying to always please them, started long before the marriage breakup. So the truth of the matter is that we need to really look closely at narcissism and look at helping children to navigate and manage, because it does have implications for the future. I like to describe it as a seed. When you see seeds of narcissism within a family, it has implications. And those implications are the fruit that is born years and many, many years later from those same seeds.
Terry, can we have a situation too of a child who comes up with a narcissistic parent in a narcissistic, with all the attending challenges that brings, narcissism brings, or narcissistic tendencies bring? Is it possible for the child then to overcompensate rather than alienate, or maybe go the other extreme and overcompensate? We've heard terms of child being an person growing up to be an empath, wanting to please everyone, those kinds of things. So what's the other side of the challenges brought on by these narcissistic tendencies?
Well, as Mr. Bartlett mentioned, that there is the pull on either side, and it depends on which parent has the greater pull on that particular child, if it is a result of a marriage. Because there's also the positives that come from it, where the child pulls towards a parent that doesn't put those stressors on them, and they prefer to be in a more comfortable and quiet zone. And we must take into consideration also that children are very resilient, and there are a lot of things that children go through that they bounce back from very fast, that we as adults struggle with for years after, but children tend to bounce back and they're resilient once the intervention is given. In respect of the other side to it, I wanted to mention earlier that as a result of a child being a child of a narcissistic tendency parent, a parent who is showing the tendencies of narcissism, there's some positives to it, because as Mr. Bartlett mentioned, the children tend to adapt, and some of the adapting can happen in a positive light, where you have children become better aware of what narcissism is and what these traits are, so they navigate themselves around it. And as they get older, they say, I would never put myself through the things that my mother or father put me through. So they kind of bounce back from it. That's the positive that can come from children being involved in that. Not that you want children to go through it, but we have some children that can navigate the way out of it, and make the statement that they're not going to put themselves or their children through such an instance. The ability to distinguish words from actions versus where the parent would want to promise things, and the narcissistic parent say, if you do this and if you do that, I'm going to do this and do that for you. And as much as the child do, it's still not enough. They're able to navigate that. Well, the promises don't mean nothing. I'm not even bothering myself with those things. So I really want to harp on the fact that children are very resilient, and that although you have the pros from either side, it depends on the individual child, and it depends on the ability to be resilient, the level of resilience. When you got a child of narcissistic parents, as I said, there are a lot of negatives that can come from it. There's a lot of damage that can be done. And I think Mr. Bartlett also mentioned that there are a lot of parents out there that are undiagnosed with a narcissistic disorder, and that in itself, as mentioned, is kind of dangerous, because if a professional does not recognize that this is what's happening, a lot of damage can be done to the point that it cannot be undone. And then the children, as they get older, I do believe the instance where where it was mentioned earlier that children, how if it's possible that a child can become narcissistic as a result of being raised by a narcissistic parent. It is possible, but I don't think possible in that the child become fully narcissistic, but the child can have some of the traits in terms of, because socialization comes into play. My parent raised me like this is how I'm being raised, and this is how I'm going to raise my child. You're expected to do this, and you cannot make me look bad out there. Those are the kind of statements that I mean, you're making me look bad out there, and I tell you that you could do well in your exam, and you're making me look bad. I spend all this money on you to be a cricketer, and you're going to get knocked. You make me look bad. And they don't only do these things in private. A narcissist will do these things to the child at the game in front of their friends. So the child might now decide, I hate sports. I hate this. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that, because guess what? Nobody is making me look bad. So the child then can, in turn, as a result of socialization, my mother treat me bad. I think it show you, and probably at the end of the day, the child develops some level of narcissism, but it is not necessary that a child of a narcissistic parent can end up becoming a narcissist himself, because as I keep repeating, and I'm a strong believer in children and their resilience, children tend to bounce back from trauma very, very easy with the right kind of help, as opposed to adults who struggle for quite a period of time, especially if it's not being addressed early.
Dr. Edwards, talk to me about connection or lack of connection, and how that affects a child, not only when he or she is a child, but as they grow into teenagers and into adulthood. The inability to connect, as you mentioned earlier, how does that affect a child throughout its lifetime?
Children live what they learn and learn what they live. And so if you live within a context where the people you depend upon are not reliable, you might learn that the only person you have to rely upon is yourself. And as you do that, the connection that you have with persons are based upon utility, whether or not the person is useful to me or not. So the connections become very tenable,
transactional.
Very transactional, and again, most persons who suffer from narcissistic features and disorder tend to be located within the disorganized attachment style, where the parent might have been all self-indulgent and not responsive to the child. And a narcissist, or a person who has a good dose of narcissistic features, might be that person who is not available to the child at those critical times. So the connections that the child develops would not necessarily be deep. They might be very superficial, and so we have to begin to look at not just the connection with the parent or the primary caregiver, but also those that are in the immediate context. So if the other children also develop this disorganized attachment style, you can understand how they, meaning siblings, you can understand how they might begin to manifest this disconnect between themselves. But this is how the child learns to relate with others in love relationships later. Unless there is reparative work done, then the child will manifest that which they have developed. This case, disorganized. And so it's that connection that becomes crucial. How do you assess that? How are they related? Is there any warmth to this? Is there the capacity to show concern. That develops out of that initial connection between child and primary caregiver. And that endures unless you begin to do the reparative work.
What about treatment? What if another family member or caregiver recognizes some of these signs that we have spoken about and decide, I want to nip this in the bud, or I want to have this child assessed, or I want this child to do the reparative work that you spoke about? What's that process like, and how would you advise someone to follow through on that?
Well, one of the things I would say to persons is that they need to find a therapist who is adept at attachment styles. That's one. And here I'm saying that not all therapists are steeped in attachment styles, especially when you talk about family therapy. Yeah, a family therapist might have done the studies, but do they also have the hours of practice that have been supervised to do it? So you find a person who is competent, who is trained, who is credentialed in working through systems, and then in turn help that child to understand, and it might not be the child, but it could be an older teenager or even a young adult. In the midst of that, what happens is that the therapist becomes the good enough mother and become the point of reference to help that child to process what they might have gone through, to come to a place where the reparative work begins. And they realize that the way they are, they don't have to be that way, that they have the template, if you like, as human beings. My brother Jordan just mentioned about how resilient children are. And if you expose persons to the kind of therapy, then they will be able to get to that place. But you also need to have, I believe, groupings in which people will be held accountable. So that's the other side to the work that you're doing. So when I was growing up, we had Boys Brigade, we had Girls Brigade, we had Boy Scouts and all of those. So within that context, you can be held accountable, but at the same time, also do the work that is necessary to see yourself not as broken and fragmented, but a person who is capable, a person who has the capacity to be good and to produce good relations, be empathetic, be able to use others for their good, to become their best selves, and allow themselves to be used of others so that they can become their best selves. So it becomes a mutual kind of transacting that takes place so that healing can happen. But it can be a daunting process given at what point the person is in their development.
Cornelius, how do you balance biblical teachings with these real world challenges brought on by narcissism and narcissistic tendencies?
I love that question. Sorry, I was just muted. I love that question, and I would say that beyond balancing, I would say the foundation and root of resolution for every or almost every problem, well, from where you say every problem of human existence resides in the Word of God and the principles that God has obeyed. So if you look, for example, at the traits that are developed in narcissism, the Bible speaks against it, for example, or gives you a remedy for it. So, for example, let's look at the popular one everybody knows about: love your neighbor as yourself. That is an anti-narcissistic statement. And if that particular statement presumes that you love yourself, so therefore the love that you have for yourself, you will give to a neighbor. And if you give it to a neighbor, you would for sure give it to your child and your husband and your wife. But here's the problem. In the world, or in the spirit of narcissism, there is no self-love. So if I were to use layman terms, I'm not trained in the area. I've studied it for 2 years as a hobby. I study human behavior, but I'm not like Mr. Jordan or Reverend Edwards. So I'm going to put it in layman terms. I would describe a person is narcissistic as a person who lacks self-love. Let's let that settle in a bit. So everything about the narcissist emanates from lack of self-love. And if you were to sum up the Bible in one word, the Bible is really a love letter. So you can see why the Bible and the Word of God would predicate the solution to narcissism. It comes at total variance with narcissism. But one of the things that I wanted to also touch on Dale, if I may, out of what one of my colleagues shared earlier, is the whole issue of what happens to children as they move on from narcissism, or as they grow up out of a narcissistic experience within the home. I want to say that a lot of times, and we adults are guilty of it, a lot of times we think we're okay. A lot of times, you have a good job, you get it every day, you go and make great speeches, you might be a professional, and you look okay. You manage to keep the marriage together for a certain amount of time, you look okay. But all the while, within the marriage or within your own personal, intimate life, there's turmoil. And that turmoil very often is mapped right back to your narcissistic upbringing, your exposure to narcissism. So even though a child may say, I don't want to be this, I don't want to be that, or a person might say, this child is resilient, sometimes that resilience is really a dysfunction marked by a lack of trust, but interpreted as resilience. So for example, if you grow up knowing that your narcissistic parent always disappointed you, and I want us to be real here, I want us to be really real here. You have a child that was raised in a narcissistic home environment. And I'm hoping that it's only one parent, but sometimes you have two parents that are narcissistic. God help those children. You have that child grows up into an adult. And in their mind, it is cemented that you can't trust people. You can't depend on people. So they go into a marriage with that narrative. I can't trust my husband. I can't trust my wife. Can you see now what implications that will have for family life? And on the surface, it looks like they're coping very well. They're resilient. They are not dependent on anybody for anything. Let me tell you, right? If you do even studies in this area called emotional intelligence, one of the things I like about it is it promotes the idea not of independence, but it promotes the idea of interdependence. I need you, and you need me. And I'm saying here now that for children raised in a narcissistic home, the chances of that is very slim, because if you grow up where you got neglected, because there are many parents in narcissistic homes who, for example, are doing very well career-wise and they make lots of money. And what they do, they give the children lots of material things. So very often you can find a parent that is extremely narcissistic, but you see the children with the best clothing, the latest in gadgets. They go to every function. At teenage years, they get a Mercedes to drive around. But the parents are narcissistic. And that child, well, you look from the outside, if you look from the outside, we're materialistic, you say, but that child is doing well, they're driving to school in Mercedes, and they have the best clothing, and they got a great private education in primary school, and they get sent to the best college. But that could be a destroyed human being, because that parent could be a narcissistic parent who is not attaching to the child in a way that a parent should, but is attaching to the child in a narcissistic way, where it says, I am going to give you things as an expression of love. I'm not going to give you me, because there's no me to give. Because I'm self-absorbed, I'm damaged, I'm ashamed, I'm angry, I'm jealous. In fact, let me put it this way. And I like to keep it real, because I did a lot of research on this. There are some narcissistic females who may have a daughter. And I'm going to say this really slowly, because I want people to understand the seriousness of this. This cannot be just a talk shop. There are some females who are so narcissistic that they have a daughter, and the daughter will be female. And the daughter ends up being beautiful, having the best shape, greatest personality. And do you know that you can have a narcissistic mother who could actually be jealous easily jealous of her daughter because of how the daughter looks. I want persons who are listening to understand how dark and serious this is. This is not just something to be talked about in a rum shop or be banded around as a joke. This is a very serious matter. And I want every person listening to understand that while there's no pill to solve narcissism, I want that church leaders, teachers, law enforcement, court officials, lawyers, everybody, social workers, everyone to recognize that while there's no push button or pill to solve narcissism, I want us to understand two things. How we can help is by helping those children to manage. How we can help is by planting good seed to undo or to neutralize the effects of narcissism on these children. Children did not ask to be born to the parents they were born to. When they're born, that's it. The deal is done. They have to be raised with these parents, a lot of them, some of them who are narcissistic. But what we can do is we can recognize when we see those traits coming through and help to manage it. A lot of these children that came from narcissistic homes, they understand how to manipulate very well because that's what they know. Remember, Reverend Edwards said it earlier. That's what they know. They know manipulation. They know people pleasing. They know how to put on a good impression. They know how to talk the good talk. And it's all very damaging. And it is damaging to the family. If we want to understand why our society is going so wrong, why marriages are not staying together, look at family and look at these issues in the family like narcissism. It's only one, but it is one worth looking at.
Carrie, what about violence? Does violence come with these narcissistic traits within parents? Is it overt? Is it subtle? What role does violence play?
I don't
I'm not
have
sure.
any,
Okay.
I had myself muted. I don't have any research to say definitively that there is violence within narcissistic parents parents who have narcissistic tendencies, but is a possibility that it can happen, especially when the child does not meet the needs of the parents in public and the embarrassment comes when they get home. There can be some physical abuse going on. I expect better you. There can also be some emotional. There can also be some emotional abuse. Where to tell the child that you're on a use and you always make me look bad in public and all those kind of statements. I spent all this money and put you on lessons, and you turn around now. I can't even spell your own name. Um, so but I would say there's no definitive research or evidence that I'm aware of that would say that these narcissistic tendency type parents exact violence, which is physical violence on the child as a result. However, in respect of the child can then go to school and you have the people pleasing type personalities. Um, you have the need to want to connect with other people because the connection is not there at home. So that's why it's finding some young ladies and even young boys to get into relationships that have um most of the time is this sexual connection because that's what happens at that age level, this sexual connection. Um, or to go to school. And because I'm not getting the attention at home from the narcissistic parent the parent with narcissistic tendencies, you get the child getting into issues and stuff so that they can force the adults in the room to look in my direction. Look at me, something is wrong, help me. I'm sending out a message, I want you to help me. So they do things in the school like get into fights and all kind of stuff. But I can't say definitively that there is the issue of violence within the homes to a child as a result of a parent with narcissistic tendencies. But I can say that I would believe that there can be. I can also say that I believe that there is a possibility of a lot of emotional abuse. I think with the narcissistic tendencies, there's a lot more emotional abuse than physical, where it is that you make me look bad, you're no use. You're just like your father, you're just like your mother. None of that's why left because you and he's the same thing making them always want to make me look bad, make me feel bad about myself. And some of the manipulation that comes through might not come in the form of an insult. It might come in the form of a narcissistic type tendency of, I don't know you. I just try my best and I just try to do my best to you. And you just don't show me the love and you just make me feel bad. And it comes in like playing on each other's emotions and manipulating each other into what I would call guilt tripping. I use the term guilt tripping each other to make them feel like I need to do more to make mommy happy, or I need to do more to make daddy happy. So I can do this and I can do that, and I can make she look good because she always crying, mommy, always crying when I don't do. So it's making it's kind of guilt tripping more so than anything else. But I cannot. I'm not to digress, but I cannot say definitively, or I can't point to any particular research that says that as a result of narcissistic parenting, that there's some violence from the parent exacted upon the child. I know the child will go to school and engage in violent behaviors for attention, but not necessarily that violence is exacted on the child as a result of narcissistic tendencies of a parent.
Dr. Edwards, what's your experience? Have you seen any cases where the child had become violent or the parent was violent to the child?
Yes, I've seen those. There is research, though, to support the narcissistic parent being abusive. The very nature of narcissistic disorder or narcissism is that it is abusive. It's not, the person is not available to the child in the way that the child needs the parent, consistently responsive in a sensitive way to the needs of the child. So neglect is a part of that abuse rubric. And yes, I agree with Mr. Jordan that emotionally, the child is mostly abused, but there can be harshness that gets communicated through the parent, from the parent, the narcissistic parent, to the child. You know, they might grab the child and pull the child along because they feel that people are looking at them and they're looking back. It's not necessarily that I am going to box you in your mouth or do those kinds of things. But physical happens sometimes, but definitely it's in the emotional and social aspects of the child's life where the abuse happens, the violence happens. And for me, violence simply means the violation of the integrity of life. So once a parent is violating the integrity of the child's life, violence is taking place. And the child now, that is where, for instance, then, that you can have a disorganized attachment pattern developing, where the child is needy, self-sacrificing in order to get favors or to feel a sense of being loved or appreciated. The child doesn't have a real sense of, and this is the transactional piece, I do something for you, so I expect you to do something back for me. But here is the thing. If you don't do it, I will tell you that I don't need it anyhow, but I know I need it. So it's a double bind kind of dynamic that is being played out. I need it, but I'm telling you I don't need it, I'm okay. So not only is the person, has the parent been abusive emotionally, now the child has become self-abusive. And that's problematic.
Does all of this come under, or could come under, the term trauma? Is this trauma? Is traumatic? Is it handled as trauma?
It should be, but not all the time regarded as such by persons, and not even the treatment reflects the working with the trauma sometimes. But it's traumatic. Imagine a child 1 to 3 years old, totally dependent upon their caregiver, and as such, what can they do to look out for themselves? Nothing. And then you neglect them. You're not responsive to their need, whether the need be to be held or the need to mirror back to the child what the child is trying to reach out to you. When they smile, you have a frown. When for instance, then the child is trying to measure up in a sense, so that their emotional and also physical needs could be met. Where is the parent in the midst of that? You see, so those in that way it also manifests.
Dale,
Yes, go ahead,
if I
Cornelia.
may, I want to also say that you asked a question, a very good question about if it's trauma. And I want to make it clear that in the annals of psychology, there is a term called trauma bonding. And trauma bonding refers to forming a deep emotional attachment to someone who causes you harm. And since a parent is the first person that a child bonds to, one can understand that if that parent is a narcissistic parent who are pulling all of the wrong moves, who are causing the children to be uncertain, who are causing the children to have to respond to manipulation, you could understand how dysfunctional that particular trauma bonding would be. So I really want us to really understand that when you look at this issue of narcissism and the effects that it has on a child, you could understand now how it creates a perfect foundation for the future possibility of parental alienation. It's certainly not surprising that when people like Dr. Childress, for example, carried out research on narcissism, on parental alienation, and he traced it back to the alienator, he said he found the majority of times you found a narcissist. And now we've discussed the whole idea of narcissism tonight. You can understand why it is so easy for a child to side with the narcissistic parent against the healthy parent. Because I consider, and I think the psychologists, they consider the narcissistic parent as being an unhealthy parent because it is a form of unhealthiness. It is not a broken leg or a broken arm. It cannot be seen physically, but it is certainly a form of emotional illness which affects their child. So I want us to really keep our focus on the child and what happens to the child as they move on in the future. And as we look at this issue of parental alienation, for us to look at how it sets up the perfect foundation for parental alienation.
Carrie, I think you mentioned it earlier, but it was said that sometimes the parent does not know that what they are doing to their child is wrong. This was done to them, or this is what they have seen, or this is what feels comfortable for them. They don't know that it is wrong. So this too is another major challenge in this whole attempt or trial or trying to make the situation better. I want you to answer that question. And the second part of it is, should we train our teachers who are necessarily the primary caregivers, but the secondary caregivers to pick up these kinds of things? So first question is, what do we do in a situation where this is happening and the parent does not understand that what they're doing is wrong to their child because this is what they're accustomed to and this is what they know? And secondly, should we have some kind of training or some kind of education for secondary caregivers to be able to spot these things? And then what can they do?
First of all, the first part of the question, in respect of parents not knowing that they're wrong, the difficulty with a narcissist is you cannot tell them that they're wrong. And they don't know how you will convince them that they're wrong. Because as they look at the whole traits behind a narcissistic tendency, it speaks specifically to persons having a grandiose personality, grandiose thing about themselves. They don't care what others think about their own personal needs, but they more care about what others think about them. So they do anything in their power to make sure that they look a certain way. So if you come to a narcissist and confront their issues, more than likely you're going to meet them with, it's going to be confrontational. So I really, that was telling a narcissist that the wrong have to be done by pretty much a professional bringing it over to them and helping them. And they have to recognize, well, my behaviors are causing me problems, causing my family problems, and causing serious issues to my child. So they have to do some introspection, and those things are very difficult for a narcissist. Um, so I would say that they will have to pretty much accept themselves that there's something wrong, and then they will then in turn hear from somebody where they need to start making some adjustments. I don't know how you treat a narcissist by telling them that they're wrong. That all you can meet in that instance is probably confrontation. The other part about training teachers to look for it, you have to be very careful about training persons to recognize diagnosis who doesn't have the empathy or the care for clients or persons with issues of mental health, because everybody does not see it as an illness, and the more see it as you got a problem and you need to stop this. So we have to be very careful. We go there and point fingers or give persons ideas of what a narcissist look like. That's why I started off earlier by saying only body that can say a person is a narcissist is a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist who have the ability to diagnose. Everybody else can see tendencies, who know what they're looking for, can see the tendencies, but the only body can say that person is a narcissist is a qualified psychologist or a psychologist. And as Dr. Gordon mentioned earlier, there are things that they have to meet, things they have to meet in the criteria. Like in the DSM, the DSM sometimes they tell you they have to meet one or two, they have to meet three or four of these, or they have to meet all of these criteria before you can say this person is. So we have to be very careful about saying you're training somebody to maybe the things we can train teachers to do is recognize abuse, recognize when a child is going through trauma, recognize when a child is dealing with emotional abuse, physical abuse, because sometimes these things may be a result of a narcissistic tendency type parent where you have emotional abuse, you might have neglect, you might have all these different things coming out, and even physical sometimes. Dr. Gordon just confirmed for me that there is research that says that can become violent. So you would train the person to look for the trauma towards the child and not necessarily looking for a diagnosis within the parent. Because then you got to train them to look for schizophrenic. You got to train them to look for bipolar. You got to train them to look for oppositional defiance and adult ADHD and all those kind of things. Look for the things that are the resulting things of all these diagnoses, which is usually trauma in the child. And it usually shows itself with the emotional abuse, the physical abuse. And once the teachers pick up on those things, then they can activate the professionals now who can say, that is the issue at hand. This is what we need to address, versus telling them to look for one specific type diagnosis and they miss everything else. Because in narcissism might not be the thing is the other term histrionic personality, they're very close. A person with narcissistic and histrionic, they have a very close, but there's some differences in there. So you gotta be very careful with training people look for them. Just tell them, train them. I believe training the teachers or the person dealing with children on a day-to-day basis to look for trauma, know what trauma looks like. And once you understand what trauma looks like, then you can get to the underlying issue, because then the trauma might mean you need to treat the parent for something else and not necessarily a narcissistic diagnosis.
Dr. Edwards, Reverend Edwards and Dr. as well. What are your thoughts on that? How do we equip the caregivers to be able to lend assistance in these areas?
You know, I 100% agree with Mr. Jones on this, in particular, because you really don't want people running around as clinicians and they're not, and make a mock of this. But one of the things I'm thankful for here in the US is the requirement that every teacher has to complete a child abuse training so that they can identify the different child abuses that might take place. in that way, the teachers could be helpful. And yes, I do. When I say I agree with Mr. Jordan 100%, I mean that, because with a narcissist, how you can tell the person that? Well, you know, I sometimes use a particular person as the model of a narcissist. All I refer to him as is 46 minus 1. But that person demonstrates narcissism, and you can't get a narcissist to even begin to say, yeah, I'm doing something. No, I'm doing that for their good. That's why I'm doing it. Why do you think I shout at him? I shout at him so that he realizes that I want him to be good. So it's the abuse piece. Noticing the signs of neglect. Noticing whether it be physical or emotional. What's the social disposition as well? Because you don't want your child to be mixing with this other person because you think they're below you, beneath you. The messages that are being communicated to the child can be abusive too. And they in turn can become abusive. Because again, what's his name? Van der Kolk, Bizzle Van der Kolk, one of the foremost authorities on trauma. His contention is that there is this tendency to repeat the trauma. There's a compulsion to repeat the trauma. So what they found is that boys who have been abused tend to abuse. Girls who have been abused tend to seek out abusers. That's what the research bears out. So then you begin to ask yourself now, okay, since you know that's the case, when a teacher sees a young child behaving in a sexualized way, there might be abuse. And so you help that child to get the kind of help that they need. And sometimes within the context of the school setting, that might be permissible. You might have a school psychologist or guidance counselor who is trained to talk with and get a sense, investigate, do some deeper investigation, and point the family in the direction of help. And we know that narcissists, when they do have resources, they will shift from one place to the next. So if you at this school talk about my child, I take my child out and take the child into a private school, and I give that private school some money. And as I give them the money, they know that I'm asking them to be shut up about this thing. And also the medical professions, nurses have to be on top of their game with regards to this as well. So yeah, it is recognizing the signs of abuse that, and by the way, not just teachers, pastors and religious persons need also to be trained, because that's where the children are. Wherever children are, persons need to get the training so that they can identify the signs of abuse. And the Samaritan rule applies. You're doing it for the good of the child, so you will not be held responsible if it turns out not to be, but at least you're erring on the side of caution, and that has to become a part of the communal addressing of this abuse of children, these traumas that children experience. I'm trying my hardest to complete a book on trauma, which should have been out long ago, but keep being a perfectionist in this regard and not getting it out. But hope it comes out sooner than later. But it's unlocking trauma, what it is that really gets played out. And so we as a whole, when I say we, society, need to put in place the checks and balances to help children to get the kind of help they need.
Cornelius, how would we introduce this kind of education into the churches? What kind of steps do you suggest that we take? Particularly when in some denominations, these things are poo-pooed, the child God demon or the child, just wicked, just need a lash in the behind. How do you get this information, as Reverend Edward said, to the church, to the pastors, to the congregation, to those people who we believe could and should be able to help?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I want to single out churches. I would want to get the information out to everyone, and I would think that seminars we are now in the era of electronic media, social media. We can have seminars, conferences, but here's the thing. See, even like what we're doing here with Family Fest, I'm sure there are lots of church leaders, members of the judiciary, teaching profession who are listening to this type of forum. And what I would want us to do is to not, first of all, see ourselves as clinicians, but to see ourselves as part of the management process. Because there's some people, and I mean, sorry to break the bad news, but there's some people who will die as narcissists or with the narcissistic traits. Let's be very clear on that. So you cannot change who your mother or father is. So what could happen as a society, and church is only part, so that's why I told you I can't. It's difficult for me to single out church as being the only source for this knowledge. But I would want the church, I mentioned it before, I want the school system, the educational system, I would want law enforcement, I would want judiciary. I would want everyone, social workers, therapists who are not knowledgeable on it, to come up to scratch on it. And see yourselves as part of the management process, because very often you are not going to change anyone, but you can help to manage the process of making it easier for our children. So that's how we want to approach it. Let's see ourselves as planting seed, and let's see ourselves as managers, helping to manage the process. But telling a narcissist they're a narcissist, as we all agree, is the worst idea. That is not wise. What you do is you keep the knowledge in your head, and you allow it to inform how you help to manage the process.
All right. This question is.
Let me just add, in respect to trauma, one thing that we should always take into consideration when it comes to trauma in children don't act out, children react. And if you look at it from that perspective, you get a better understanding of how trauma affects children. Children don't act out. A child reacts. In every instance, a child only reacts because the only thing a child knows to do best is react. So I just want to put that in the context of trauma and narcissistic tendency parents. The behaviors that you get from children as a result of trauma is reactions and not acting out.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. We have a question from Wayne P. Hoyt. He asks, how is the relationship between parents and children impacted when the child or children are in the care of narcissistic relatives and friends who expose the children to their behaviors? I think we touched on that a little earlier, but either Dr. Edwards or you, Carrie, could just reiterate, how is the relationship between parents and a child or children impacted when they're in the care of a narcissistic relative or friends who expose the children to these behaviors? Okay, I'm going to have to volunteer you, Carrie. Let's go.
So hoping Dr. Edwards would have answered the question. Because at the end of the day, if I'm clear on what the person is asking, they're asking how do the parent of the child react to deal with a relative who's doing it to their child? I'm trying to see
they're asking how is the relationship between the parents and children impacted when it isn't necessarily that the parents are narcissistic, but they are spending time in the company of relatives and friends who are narcissistic.
Once again, I go back to, I keep harping on this narcissistic diagnosis versus tendencies. I don't think that the children are going. I don't know how to answer that one because I don't think they're going towards narcissistic family members because it is attractive. I don't know how. I'll be very honest. I don't know how to answer that one.
Can I take
I think the question is, okay, you may have great healthy parents, but your granny maybe have narcissistic tendencies, and you spend time, your parents are working, you spend weekends and summers and vacations with granny, and granny has these narcissistic tendencies. How is that going to impact on that child who is in that relative's presence over a prolonged period of time?
It can have a negative impact if the child has I think I heard Mr. Bartlett mention it earlier. You talk about the Stockholm syndrome, where an abused person becomes attached to the abuser. It can have an impact if the child is connected to the grandparent on another level, and the connection is greater than that connection of the family member. But in the instance that the child is more connected to mommy and daddy, the child is going to come home every day and complain about what grand is doing all day long. And the parents in that instance will have to take the necessary action to tell grand, you out of order, you do this with me, don't try it with my child because it did not work for me well, and I don't want you damaging my child. So some conversation has to be had, and it would be one where probably a professional might need to get involved. But that impact would only happen negatively if the child is not as connected to the mother and father as it is to the grandmother. And if it's very connected to the grandmother, then you're gonna got the issue now of telling the child negative things about the parents, so that the child will become more and more connected to you. And I think there was an aspect of it where in when I was looking through the whole thing, narcissistic parenting and stuff, is this thing about they are extremely jealous and possessive of others. The grandmother becomes possessive of the child and tries to bring about what is the whole topic for this whole family fest. Is the alienation aspect of it now comes into play, where the grandmother pin the child against. That's where I can see the negative impacts coming. The grandmother say your mother will pick up this man here and marry him and throw them in the use, and I'm making sure that you don't get messed up in this whole situation. So when you see them arguing, you can come over by me, and I can make sure to take care of you. I know. So the child is being fed and promised things of feel good moments, and then that's when the alienation comes in. There's some negative aspect of it, but in general, I don't see the child being impacted if the relationship with the mother and father is stronger than that of the relationship with the grandmother.
I'd like to get your
Or the
take,
grandparent,
Dr.
sorry.
Edwards. I'd like to get your take, Dr. Edwards.
You're muted, Dr. Edwards.
Yeah, you see, we might talk about the grandmother, but it could be the aunt as well, who has resources.
Yeah, I was using that as an example.
Yeah, no, I realize that, but here is the piece. The aunt is a person of great resources, and so this child feels an affinity to that person. And the person will say that, this is how we are supposed to be in the world. This is how we are supposed to show up. It is going to have adverse impact upon the parents and child relationship. Very negative ones, because now the child understands what to value because they see it being demonstrated with auntie or uncle. The additional problem with that is the ongoing corruption of the child's understanding of self as expressed through things. And if parents can't provide as auntie or uncle or grandma can provide, which is the other piece now, because grandma might be the power center of the family. Grandma has the power to leverage against the parents. They're living in grandma's house. And if they're living in grandma's house, you have to allow me to have my way with my grandkids if they're going to live here. Or even another setting, grandma might say, but I have been helping to support you guys. You do this and I'm out. And the family collapses financially. So it's a negative thing in the sense that the child is gradually being taken away from the parents by the grandmother or the siblings or whoever else, family members. And what the parents are trying to do with the child gets undermined. So here again is where, as Mr. Jordan mentioned, you might need to have a professional intervention so that the balance is reset. And the parents are parents to the child, and grandma is supporting of parents, not the child, of the parents, and what the parents are doing. So again, it's looking at the system in which this entire family operates.
I just want to stay here with you, Dr. Edwards, because this was mentioned earlier, and I want to come back to this about these traits of narcissism appearing in crisis of relationships or marriages where children are involved. So is it a situation where the parent was always narcissistic, but it was so subtle you didn't notice it? Or as Carrie keeps telling us, we can't diagnose. So how does narcissism manifest itself, and and then it just comes to the fore? How does that work?
We are accustomed to the overt narcissist. And the covert narcissists go under the radar. This is a person who thrives upon vulnerability. They're vulnerable. Oh, things happen to me and the kind of thing, and I'm not making too much of it. But what I'm really doing is to make much of it, but not in the way the overt narcissist does. You have at least 7 different types of narcissism, That's how detailed the research has been on this. But a covert narcissist might be the one that we have to pay some attention to, because they tend to present themselves as victims, and they tend to be quick to cry or to stage a crisis so that they get attention. So imagine the child is, you go to school and the parent is saying to the teacher is saying to them, something is going on here, and the mother starts to cry. I'm doing everything I can, I have to work, I have to do this, and this is why. But understand, that's one of the ways in which the mother manipulates the child and manipulates the system so that she gets what she wants. And here I use mother, but it's parent. That's how they manipulate the system. This cuts both ways. Both you have covert narcissists as fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters along the way. But it's that has to be brought through too.
May I?
Yeah.
You're muted, yeah.
And I'm the moderator. I'm supposed to be speaking. Thank you, Cornelius. I want to, because we pretty much have to wrap up. This has been such an interesting conversation. I'm glad that it's happening. And I wanted to get some comments from Facebook, but time is against us. But we seem to have a very spirited conversation happening on our Facebook page. But as we wrap up, though, I'm going to start with you, Carrie. Any final words that you want to leave with our viewers and those who are members of Family Fest and followers of Family Fest?
Yes, the only thing I pretty much want to add is that we educate ourselves when we see things that are concerned to us. You educate yourself, or you report it to somebody that you know can speak to it and address it in a meaningful way. And second of all, in respect of mental health or mental illnesses, that you see it as a mental illness and not that something is wrong with the person and the negative stigma is brought to bear. And for me, being a strong advocate of young people and children, I want to add that in respect of children, that we have to do everything in our power to protect our children, and in doing so, recognize when trauma is there, and when you understand what trauma is and recognize what trauma is, you report it to the right persons who can effect some sort of change in our children's lives. My thing is with children, reach one, teach one. And that's basically it. Reach one, teach one is my thing, my mantra for dealing with children.
Reverend Dr. Edwards, final thoughts from you.
One of the statements I made earlier on is that children live what they learn and learn what they live. And so we have to pay attention to those first 2.5 to 3 years of life and how we are responsive to the needs of the child. Emotional needs, physical needs, social needs, spiritual needs. Have to be very attentive to that. And I don't mean in a way that is overly indulgent. It's here consistency in response, consistency in your sensitivity in your response to these children, because this is where the attachment patterns get developed. And if you miss this, then the work becomes a challenge later.
Cornelius, your final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yes, I just want to quickly say that, earlier you asked a question about the whole issue of how does it manifest all of a sudden. And I just wanted to quickly say that, a lot of times people look for persons to marry or to connect with who serves a purpose for them. So in other words, you find out the person who is giving, a selfish person will find them very quickly because they're giving. So the issue of narcissism has to do with supply. But when the supply is shut off, that is where the narcissist is triggered. Yeah, so I wanted to leave that there. And I also want to say finally that prevention is better than cure. And we need to think about our children, because every single adult, guess what, started as a child. And this whole idea of how narcissism, and this is the topic tonight, affects children, I want it to be taken seriously. And I want us to recognize that whatever the cost of cure, it is times less cost for prevention. So let's look out for our children and do whatever it takes to protect the next generation. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I just want our viewers to know that you can stay connected to Family Fest's informative discussions and insights by subscribing to their YouTube channel at Family Fest Barbados. You can simply click the subscribe button to stay updated and informed. Together, let's work to empower families in Barbados. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram to stay informed and to spread a message of help, hope, healing, and happiness. Their social media handle is Family Fest Barbados, as we said, on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and the website is familyfestbarbados.org. So a special thanks to Reverend Dr. Gordon Edwards. It was a pleasure meeting you, as well as Kerry Jordan. And of course, always good to see and chat with you, Cornelius. Thanks to everyone who watched us. And we hope that you were able to take something positive, not only for this discussion, but for the rest of your life. So until our next discussion, which I believe is going to be on Thursday, July 18th, and I should know that because I'm going to be the moderator, Thursday, July 18th at 7:30 p.m. for children as victims of parental alienation, and it will be streaming again on YouTube and Facebook. So have a wonderful night, guys, and have a wonderful night to our viewers, and have a safe and productive day tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. With God on our side, we're marching strong, looking out for hurting children all around.